4 years ago, a little girl vanished from her home in Royal, Tennessee. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. And in the time since, not a single trace of her has been found. No suspect, no body, no answers. This is the story of little Summer Wells, a case where silence may be the loudest clue of all. Authorities searched the woods, drained ponds, and knocked on doors. They tore apart the Wells home, get this, 11 times. And yet, after 4 years, the central mystery still hangs in the air. Did Summer leave the property at all? Or has the truth been hiding in plain sight, just steps away from where searchers once stood? In this video, we're going to walk through the timeline, the places investigators overlooked, and the behavior of those closest to her. We'll also examine why investigators have quietly returned to the Wells property, this time with a sharper focus on a place many people dismissed at first, a small shed near the bottom of the land. So let's step back to the afternoon of June 15th, 2021, because if we're ever going to find answers, we need to look at the 2 hours where everything changed. On June 15th, 2021, the Wells property on Ben Hill Road looked like any other summer day in rural East Tennessee. Workers were trimming trees along nearby Simpson Road, their chainsaws buzzing through the thick June heat. Neighbors were outside tending their yards. For most of the day, there was movement, sound, and activity. But at exactly 4:30 p.m., something shifted. The work crew packed up, loaded their trucks, and drove away. The sounds of labor stopped, and for the first time that day, Ben Hill went quiet. Now, in most rural communities, silence is nothing unusual. A hollow in Tennessee can sit still for hours, broken only by the hum of cicadas or the bark of a dog. But in this case, that silence matters, because between 4:30 and 6:30 p.m., we have a 2-hour window where there were no workers, no deliveries, no neighbors passing through, no random traffic. For those 2 hours, the only people who know exactly what happened were the ones already at the property. And here's the haunting part. At 6:30 p.m., Summer's mother, Candace Bly, called 911. She reported her daughter missing, but what investigators now believe is that the critical question may not have been what happened before Summer disappeared, but what happened during those 2 silent hours afterwards. Think about it. If Summer was taken by a stranger, the risk of someone being seen, heard, or interrupted during the crew that were working and their presence would have been really high. But once the tree trimmers left, that risk vanished. The silence of Ben Hill created what investigators call a low-risk window, a period where visibility drastically dropped. Accountability was like non-existent, and the opportunity for concealment became very real. So, what if Summer didn't wander away? What if she never left the property? Yes, you heard me. That is a theory that people are looking at right now. What if, in that silent 2-hour gap, someone panicked and made a decision that has kept this case cold ever since? When investigators returned to the Wells property in recent months, they didn't storm the house. They didn't comb the woods the way they had in the frantic early days. Instead, their attention shifted to the perimeter, to this old weathered shed. And it sat at the very edge of the land near Beach Creek Road. From a distance, the shed looks ordinary. Just another outbuilding on a rural property, the kind that you'd expect to see, like storing tools or storing tires, old equipment, or whatnot. But its location makes it significant because it's far enough away from the house and it's not in direct view. There's a lot of foliage, a lot of trees, but yet it's close enough that someone could carry or drag something there in minutes. The slope and the thick summer foliage provide natural camouflage. During the first searches, law enforcement focused on the house, the immediate yard, dog trail, and the woods. There are natural priorities, and so the last place Summer was seen and the areas a child might wander would be these type of areas. So that's why they made those areas a top priority. Outbuildings, especially ones that appear, quote, normal, often get a quick once-over rather than a forensic sweep. But here's the reality investigators face in cases like this. Cadaver dogs miss things. They can fail in humid weather when scent doesn't travel properly. They can fail when a body is shallowly buried, masked with plastic, or temporarily stored. There are documented cases out there where remains were found just feet away from the search team who had already passed through. Now, if the shed was overlooked or if it was only superficially checked, it's possible something was missed. And if the renewed search activity from the TBI agent is any clue, they may be returning to this area because of a new tip or because forensic reanalysis has suggested they need a second look. Now consider the timing again. Between 4:30 and 6:30 p.m. This is when the property was quiet. Someone familiar with the land would have had total control, no workers, no neighbors, no traffic. If they needed a temporary place to conceal something, whether evidence or even Summer herself, the shed offered both convenience and the concealment element. But the most chilling thought, if Summer's body was ever placed there, even for just a few hours, it means she may never have left the property at all. That the truth was always within reach, hidden in the shadow or the shadow of searchers who believed they had already looked everywhere, and it would be something if they found her right under their nose. Now, let's talk about something that often gets overlooked in the conversation, the role of child protection service. At the time of Summer's disappearance, the Wells family was under CPS investigation. That detail might not seem important at first glance, but in reality, it changes everything. Think about it. If a family is already under scrutiny, every decision they make after a crisis becomes influenced not just by grief, but by fear. Fear that their other children will be taken away. Fear of being blamed. Fear of jail time, of headlines, judgment. So imagine this scenario. Something happens to Summer. Now, this is all alleged. It could be an accident, like a fall, or a drowning. It could even be something medical like heat stroke that went unnoticed until it was too late. Now, under normal circumstances, a parent might dial 911 immediately, desperate for help. But in a home where CPS is already watching, the decision isn't so simple. Suddenly, calling for help doesn't feel like safe, it feels like a risk. And at the moment, panic takes over. People under panic don't think about long-term consequences. They don't weigh evidence or construct elaborate lies. They just react. Sometimes that reaction is to hide the problem, or to buy them some time, or to hope that they can figure out what to do next. Psychologists call this a defensive survival strategy. When fear overrides morality, self-preservation becomes the priority. That may explain why the Wells family didn't call immediately, why they waited until 6:30 p.m. to dial 911, nearly 2 hours after the silence fell on Ben Hill. By then, the opportunity window had closed, but the cover-up window had already begun. And here's where the psychology deepens. Panic fades, but once that initial wave of terror passes, people often start to rationalize their decision. They begin telling themselves a story that helps them live with the guilt. And what was that story in this case? That Summer was abducted, that she didn't die here. She was taken away. That belief, whether true or not, becomes a shield. It protects them emotionally and legally. But there's a big but here. Shields can crack. And they typically do. Sometimes it's within weeks, sometimes months, and in Summer's case, in other cases, sometimes years. And when you look at how Dawn and Candace have behaved since that day, their silence, their inconsistencies, their refusals to demand clarity, it doesn't read like parents searching for truth. It reads like parents clinging to a story because the alternative is too devastating to admit. There are a lot of dysfunctional families out there. I've seen them, but I think this one takes the cake. But with this family, one of the most striking aspects of this case isn't just the missing girl, it's the way her parents presented themselves to the world. In most missing children cases, parents appear like they're together, united, making joint pleas for their child's safe return. Not Dawn and Candace. Nope. They never did. There was no press conference where they stood side by side looking into the camera, begging for their daughter's life. Instead, we saw fragmented statements, awkward interviews, and long stretches of silence. Candace, in particular, has remained very quiet. She's given very little interviews. Most of those interviews were very brief, guarded, and pretty much emotionally flat. She avoids eye contact. She struggles with timeline and rarely shows any type of emotion at all. While trauma can affect people differently, what really stands out is that Dawn never challenges her on it. He dominates the narrative, but never questions her version of the events. And I find that very interesting. It's almost as if they've drawn invisible boundaries around it's like each one is staying vague just enough not to contradict the other, but never providing enough detail to clarify what actually really happened that evening, those 2 hours. And sometimes I wonder if something happened before 4:30 p.m. Just my opinion, just saying. And then there's the absence of curiosity. If Dawn truly believed his wife's account was incomplete, wouldn't he press her for answers? Wouldn't he at some point in private demand to know what happened in those hours? The fact that he doesn't, or at least has never admitted to, suggests either complacency or some kind of pact of silence. Together, their behavior doesn't read like two parents frantically searching for truth. It reads like two people maintaining a fragile narrative. And in a case where ambiguity may be their greatest defense, the flip side of that coin, silence becomes not just suspicious, but it's strategic. Now, why they waited until 6:30 p.m. to dial 911, nearly 2 hours after the silence fell on Ben Hill. By then, the opportunity window had closed, but the cover-up window had already begun. And here's where the psychology deepens. Panic fades, but once that initial wave of terror passes, people often start to rationalize their decision. They begin telling themselves a story that helps them live with the guilt. And what was that story in this case? That Summer was abducted, that she didn't die here. She was taken away. That belief, whether true or not, becomes a shield. It protects them emotionally and legally. But there's a big but here. Shields can crack. And they typically do. Sometimes it's within weeks, sometimes months, and in Summer's case, in other cases, sometimes years. And when you look at how Dawn and Candace have behaved since that day, their silence, their inconsistencies, their refusals to demand clarity, it doesn't read like parents searching for truth. It reads like parents clinging to a story because the alternative is too devastating to admit. To understand why this silence is so striking, let's compare it to another case, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann in 2007. Madeleine was a 3-year-old who vanished from a holiday apartment in Portugal. Her case became one of the most widely publicized missing child investigations in modern history. Now, whether you agreed with everything her parents did or not, one thing cannot be denied. They made noise, and a lot of it. They screamed her name from the rooftop. Kate and Jerry McCann launched press conferences. They spoke directly into cameras. They begged for help. They distributed photos. They did that worldwide. They refused to let the public forget their daughter's fate. In contrast, the Wells, when Summer disappeared, there was no major press conference, no organized campaign, no fun spearheaded by parents themselves. Candace gave a short, very flat interview where she spoke more about planting the flowers than about her missing daughter. Dawn gave scattered interviews, often to YouTubers, sometimes under the influence, and usually focused more on how he was perceived than on Summer herself. It's like their self-image was much more precious than their daughter. And that's not just a difference in personality. That's a difference in urgency. Grieving parents, whether they're doctors in Portugal or families in Tennessee, politicians in Washington, they just don't sit back and stay silent when their child disappears. They fight, and they fight loudly, desperately, constantly, because grief knows no class, no culture, no background. I personally would stop at nothing to find my missing child, or in my case, actually, a grandchild, step-grandchild that I now have, 3 step-grandchildren. I would walk over hot coals for them children. I would do anything to find them. So, ask yourself, why was that fire missing there? Why were the Wells not screaming Summer's name into every microphone they could find? The uncomfortable answer is that silence may have served them better than noise, because noise invites scrutiny, and scrutiny invites questions they may not have wanted. Now, it's 4 years later that silence has become deafening. And in true crime, sometimes silence speaks louder than words. For all the manpower and resources poured into this case, there's another angle that we can't ignore. Blind spots in the search itself. Hundreds of people combed the wood, helicopters scanned from above, cadaver dogs swept the property. On paper, it all sounds exhausting. But here's the hard truth. Even the best searches miss things. Why? Because the environment. June in East Tennessee is hot, humid, dense as a mother effer. The foliage is thick, visibility is low, and scent doesn't travel the way it does cooler, open condition. In fact, there are documented cases where cadaver dogs have walked within feet of a body and failed to alert simply because the air was too stiff or the scent was trapped under leaves. And let's not forget, this wasn't treated as a crime in the beginning. It was treated as a missing child. That means investigators were focused on finding Summer alive, not preserving potential evidence. They didn't go rip up soil or cut back trees or dismantle sheds. They didn't bring in any heavy equipment to search under the structures. That's standard procedure in a missing persons, but it leaves massive gaps if the truth was right there on the property all along. So when you put the terrain together with the timeline and the chilling picture emerges, a child could have been hidden mere feet from the house and no one would have known. And if that's the case, then the biggest blind spot wasn't in the wood. It was in the assumption that Summer had left the property. That's why the recent return of investigators to the shed matters so much. It's not just routine. It's not just tying up loose ends. It's an acknowledgement that something may have been missed. And if something was missed, then the truth might still be there, buried, hidden, or waiting to be uncovered. So here we are, 4 years later. No arrests, no confessions, no body, just questions. Questions about timeline, about behavior, about silence. Questions about a shed that sits on the edge of the property and a 2-hour gap that still hangs over this case like a shadow. And that leaves us with the hardest truth of all. This case is not over. It's not solved. It's not even close to closure. It's paused, waiting, caught in the silence of those who know more than what they're ever willing to admit. But silence doesn't have to win, because cases like this are often cracked, not by law enforcement alone, but by people, neighbors, family, friends, or even strangers who finally find the courage to speak. Maybe you heard something that didn't seem important at the time. Maybe someone confided in you after a few drinks. You know, alcohol usually brings out the truth. No filter there. But maybe you saw a vehicle parked where it shouldn't have been. If you know something, say something. Call in a tip. Send a letter. Share what you know. Because Summer still matters. Her name is still spoken. Her face is still remembered. And her story still deserves an end. And if you don't know anything personally, you can still help. Share her photo. Keep her name alive. Don't let silence be the last word in her story. Because silence protects secret, but truth sets them free. Summer Wells was just 5 years old. She disappeared. She deserves the answer. She deserves justice. And until that comes, we cannot stop asking the hard question, because one day the truth will be louder than the silence. If you enjoyed this video and the way I presented this information, I appreciate it if you would please give this video a thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Share my video. That is a free way that you can help me grow my channel. And until next time, I thank you very much for watching. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video.